So in the rough stage, that's actually where I think a lot of the digital, that's where a lot of benefits come into play from working digitally, because you can flip compositions. Imagine if you drew the perfect punching pose, but it's facing the wrong way, or it's needs to be rotated or scaled a little bit, then you can do that stuff in Photoshop, and it's very easy. But I go through that procedure. Also, if you have extra ideas while you're drawing, you draw a punching pose, it's not quite right for this, but you might as well save it and put it in your master reference library. I also talk about how to resize and save out images for your editor to look at, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, what was really cool at the end, you put a nice note to the beginners, which I thought was really great, to just kind of give some tips like, hey, here's some things that you need to know if you're just getting started out with this, which I liked that, because as you're going through all this, it really is something that I felt, whatever stage you're at in this process, this book was pretty accessible to get but I liked your little tips, because I think that's what makes a book more personal. And like I said, I've read a lot of how-to books, a lot of guidebooks, and some of them it's like pulling teeth when you get through them. And this one felt personal throughout, because there was a lot of personality to it, where you weren't afraid to throw in like little tips and tricks and things like that, which I think is what we all, whenever we're reading a guidebook, that's what we really want. Those little personal things like, hey, what went wrong, and how did you fix it? And is there a way to fix it? And those were littered throughout this, that it is okay to have problems along the way, and there are fixes for them, and this is what you do, and here's some tips, and just kind of keep in mind that that's part of the playing process. One question I had, when we were taking a look at the roughs, rough caption and dialogue placement, I guess it's something I never thought about. Do you a lot of times find that when you go and do your art, does doing it digitally help when you need to go back and put in those captions and dialogues to find the space for them? Because I can imagine as an artist, when you're drawing a scene that you're given in the script, there's got to be times where you go back and say, okay, where do I put the words now? Or where are the words going to go? And is that part of the reason why you then would do the roughs, so that way before you get into the heavy work of really doing a detailed page, you know exactly where those are going to go before you do the drawing?
Absolutely, you're right on the money. I find it very helpful to know where the dialogue and narration captions, the approximate location of them, and it is exactly for that. It's so that you don't waste a lot of time drawing a big crowd of people in an area that's going to be covered up with a big word balloon. My very first efforts drawing comic books back in '97 was the very first full comic book that I ever attempted to draw, and I never took into account how much narration or dialogue there was. So when getting lettering back, it was abysmal for everyone in the process. I was not happy because so much of the work was covered up. The lettering artist had to think of very creative and subpar solutions to where to put the captions, because I had so much effectively important information that needed to be covered up. So it was my own poor planning. That is a very essential part. In fact, I think Mike Mignola wrote about, I'm not even sure which book I was reading, I think it's called Comics Panel or something like that, I can't remember. But in any case, he was saying that the lettering is a part of the design, it's a part of the composition. If you don't account for where the lettering will go, you are missing out on a huge part of the composition. You're ignoring a big facet, and you even know that it's going to be there. So it's irresponsible even. He didn't say all that, but I'm saying it's irresponsible for you not to take into account where the lettering is going to go. Even if you're working as an artist working from an loose script or an open script, which is closer to the Marvel method, which is working from a plot, even then you should still account for if this is going to be a dialogue-heavy area and accounting for that. My editors, especially on Run, basically used my dialogue placement guidelines or guides for where to put the dialogue. They didn't follow it to a T, but it gave them an idea of where I thought it would need to go and where I basically accounted for it. So it's essential.
As we're talking about this, the next logical flow then is, okay, we've got everything laid out. We know what everything, what the book's going to look like when we're done. We got to get into wireframes. I got to say one thing before we talk about Chapter 9, though. That shot of Blue Beetle that you did, I remember that issue, that fill-in issue that you did of Blue Beetle with Superman in it. That is one of my favorite pieces that you've ever done.
Oh, great.
Because I so much, and it's every time I see it, I smile because I think Blue Beetle in that particular scene represents all of us. We all wanted to fly along with Superman like that, and it is every time I see that particular shot. I know when we had you on, when you had done that issue, I remember saying that to you there, and it was one of those things when I turned that page, I'm like, oh, there it is. One of my favorite sequences, so I just wanted to note that one again, because I think it was Blue Beetle number 15.
It was, yeah. It was a fill-in issue of it. And thank you very much. I honestly made a pass through all the artwork that I had done, looking for images that were, of course, good examples of whatever throughout this process, anything that I laid out in the book. But secretly, my other objective was to use as many shots of Superman as I could. So I didn't have a whole ton of Superman shots that really were applicable, unfortunately. So I ended up, I just used whatever really would work. But any opportunity that I had, I tried to get some Superman in there. Because, and that's why I chose him for the cover as well. Just, I wanted to draw Superman. So.
The screenshots throughout the book as well of various stages of art development, of what your computer screens look like, things like that. Myself, I'm a very visual person. I like to see what my end product should look like, even if mine looks a little different because I'm personally doing it. It's nice to be able to, throughout the book, be able to see, while we've got these wonderful text pieces that are doing step by step, you also have a visual that you can count on and look at and say, okay, my screen should look something like this if I'm doing things properly. And then I can know right away if I'm not, okay, this is my target goal as far as what it should roughly look like. I really appreciated that throughout the book because it's a very visual book.
I wanted people to have that exact reaction that you just said, is be able to follow along and not feel like they're getting lost in a jungle of words or something.
And for people who are new to this, you've talked about wireframes on the show before, but what are wireframes for people who haven't heard that before?
Wireframes is a term that I use. They are tight structure drawings that are drawn, so if you're drawing a figure, for example, you are drawing all of the anatomy on the whole figure and all the design elements. So if it's Superman, you have the cape and the S and everything in his boots. But the wireframe drawings, are devoid of any sort of light or texture, or I should say shadow or texture. And the point of a wireframe is just to make sure that it's to keep you honest, to be honest. To be honest, it's to keep you honest. It's so that as an artist, at least for me when I was younger, I would have a tendency to get so excited about wanting to jump to the rendering stage of a piece of art that I would sometimes build that artwork on faulty structure or faulty anatomy. And when you're drawing something, imagine, there's no place to hide basically when you're drawing something, drawing a wireframe drawing, because there is no shadow to hide stuff behind. There's no texture to try to cover up, a misshaped back or chest or whatever. In other words, it's to make it as clear as possible exactly what the anatomy looks like. And if it's not right, make it right. And to get all your perspective down before you go to the next step, whether it be the hybrid inks or the digital inks. So wireframes to me is artistically speaking, I guess, roughs are the most important layout-wise, but wireframes to me is the most important mechanical step to make sure that everything is structurally sound.
You have some great shots in the book of your wireframes or your figure drawings of Tim Drake. And one of the things I know as a fan myself that I appreciate about art is, even though we're seeing a flat page, my favorite artists, when I look at the character, I feel like they're the side that we're not seeing of them, like behind them or the side view of them, like we could somehow pan the camera around and we'd see all those things. Even though they're not there, there's something about the artwork that it makes my mind see all those things.